Welcome to the Lost Signals discusses philosophy, narrative, and the mechanics of criticism. In this show, we analyze the greatest minds of narratology, both classic and current. Enjoy.
Hello there. Welcome back to Lost Signals discusses philosophy and the mechanics of criticism and narratology and so forth. I am Scott Thurlow, and I love my own art, but I hate myself. I am here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
You have to kill your heroes.
Indeed. And Stephen Amosi.
Hey, how's it going?
And Christopher Morgan.
Where no truth has gone before.
Indeed. So, thank you. So this episode's topic is going to be broadly art versus the artist. That is to say, can and or how do you appreciate a piece of artwork, etc., knowing some perhaps unfortunate or uncomfortable things about the actual artist who produced that work. So that's sort of broadly we're going to talk about a couple of things, a couple big pillars, we'll say, angles that we'll approach it from. But that's what the premise is, and I'm going to toss it over to E to maybe flesh out a little bit of this.
Well, the nature of art versus the artist is a huge argument.
Right. It's a very broad topic. I admittedly, yes.
In preparation for this, I read Roland Barthes' Death of the Artist. So, but it's interesting that when we think of artwork, production of art, the idea of the author having anything almost to do with it is almost a modern sensibility. If you go back to like the Homeric epics, the classics, yeah, we had like philosophers at that point, but like Homer itself was not a person. Art existed culturally, and there's no performance that is what you suggest that is the true version of Homer's Odyssey. It was performed individually. Additions were made. It had living breath to it.
Right. There was less authorship, I guess we'll say.
It's actually comes out of modern times, actually. Modern Enlightenment era, when it's dealing into the rationality of man and how individuals enact change upon the world, then the artist became a prominent player, where you have like Cervantes and Don Quixote, this that, and the kind of modern concept of the artist having anything to do with his work is kind of a relatively new idea. And now there's a big debate over it. Like, does art once produced stop having any connection with the artist itself? Or does it transcend that to the individual reader and the individual experience? And that all ties into how you would go about discussing this. Do you think that does the artist have any relation to the work they produce? Or are there different styles of artwork that's produced that transcend Sorry, you threw me off with your interruption. Is there a thing that does art eventually ever transcend the author to being greater than? An example is that who's the artist behind the Bond franchise nowadays? You can say Ian Fleming, and you can say Ian Fleming's a terrible guy, but Bond exists far beyond Ian Fleming. Is there any director? Is there any actor who you can say one actor portrayed Bond better than the other ones, but it exists as a cultural collective?
Well, beyond that.
Yeah, and that's an example of almost like the Homeric epic. Other stuff you can say that like Orwell, which you bring up to, is that Orwell actually produced artwork for propaganda purposes as anti-communist things like Animal Farm. You can't divide his intention as the artist past the work that he produced. So it's a very open question. That's just kind of some beginning notes I took on when analyzing this.
No, you're certainly right. Like I said, admittedly, about the cover. So with that, what do you guys make of it? Steve-O, Chris, weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very weighty and big question, right? There's a lot of it comes down to where do you draw the line between the artist and the art that they made, and like how much like things like Bond or to an extent Star Wars and the Marvel movie and stuff like that. Like there's certainly at some point those had a hand on the helm, but they've grown beyond any of that. And but the thing is, like, you can still judge the individual artists that are involved in those if
Certainly.
need be. Like that doesn't preclude them from judgment just because they're part of a bigger whole that you know,
Conglomerate
like
nature.
Ian Fleming was kind of a piece of shit. And yeah, like I don't necessarily hold it against Bond in general, but you can see it in the books that he wrote to an extent, and you can certainly judge that one way or another as you will. So I think there's a lot that goes into it, and some of my favorite things and formative books and movies and things
Were written by pieces of shit.
were written
You're about
by
to say.
people that it's ended up being problematic or fucked up and just fucked up. And like, yeah, I mean there's a lot to it. So what do you think, Chris?
Chris, go
I'm
ahead.
going to kind of do it's going to be kind of a meta analysis because I have praised Star Trek so much. And one of the things I love doing is kind of picking at it and kind of mocking where it fucked up. And Gene Roddenberry in his life did some very heroic things as a pilot, World War II. But his art, the university created Star Trek, the things he did aside from it contradicted the message and even within it.
And that's
number one.
problematic. Yeah, exactly.
He created this utopian socialist society, but he wrote really god-awful lyrics to Alexander Courage's theme just so he can get royalties. I would recommend you not looking them up, but looking up Tenacious D's version of Star Trek because it's pretty awesome. Here's a man who was against war and the Red Scare horseshit, which is why we had Chekhov on the bridge, and wrote this really god-awful Red Scare propaganda episode called The Omega Glory, where it ends up with Kirk reading the Constitution on an identical Earth. But lastly, and this is why I'm wearing the Delta from Discovery, when he first did his first pilot, he had Nigel Barrett being number one, the first officer of the Enterprise, and that got huge backlash. And even in the second pilot, he wanted the women to have the exact same uniforms as the men, put them in pants before the studio inflicted the mini skirts on the women. So for the last Star Trek of the original series aired was something called The Turnabout Intruder. Now, this is a great example of Star Trek fucking up a message show in that he wrote this show where Kirk switches bodies with an ex-girlfriend who's dying of radiation poisoning. And Kirk just turns into the stereotypical harpy woman, quote unquote, filing her nails. Here's one of the lovely lines from it. Only this Captain Kirk is not afraid to kill at all. This is with Janice in Kirk's body. Now you know the indignity of being a woman. For this agony will soon pass as it has for me. Believe me, it's better to be dead than live alone in the body of a woman. This was.
Is it
It's
now?
true. Yeah.
This was and for more mixed messages in Star Trek, please refer you to season 1 of Next Generation. Now, in that, he was trying to comment on the fact that, Starfleet wouldn't let women be captains. The network wouldn't let women be the first officer or something. But he was kind of like so blinded by what he did that, especially like in these things in first season of Next Generation, his messages were antithetic to what he was trying to convey. But in real life, and I'm not going to disparage the man, but apparently he was kind of a womanizer. He was very much a capitalist. So in this way, you've got this expansive universe that he grabbed onto for a whole time. And it was kind of like this duality, like we're discussing the duality of art and how it transferred. Here's somebody who stayed with something and kind of continued this.
Certainly. Well, obviously, of course, Star Trek Explains is the be-all, end-all of all pop culture discussions. But no, like I get your point. I see what you mean. And I'm going to tie it a bit in. You mentioned Orwell. Devo, you mentioned the Marvel stuff, right? So, for example, and the one I was going to purport you guys, I'll just say it now, is Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. Now, I enjoy his work. Yes, there he is in the background if you're watching this behind Steve-O creepily doing his Lovecraft thing, right?
It's furious.
a bit of more than a bit of a racist, a xenophobe, and an anti-Semite, even though he married a Jewish woman. So it's like I didn't really know like much about him. I got into his works, of course, much earlier, or at least before I started researching and learning about who he was as a person, as an actual human being, and what his mindset and views were. And I feel like that's sort of a possible sort of example that you can apply to many things, right? So Orwell was writing in the wake post World War II sort of British propaganda for a certain political mindset as well. I'm just saying these are broad things. It's almost like, to me, kind of like a spectrum where
You can categorize different authors.
Exactly.
Lovecraft. I think that Lovecraft and Kafka
that's good.
are more important for
Their impact upon
the styles they've built. That there's no coincidence that there's Kafkaesque and Lovecraftian to describe certain styles, and their styles transcended any of the individual works they built, and it's transcended. It's not important who they were; it's that tone they developed.
In these cases, I would say it's less important. Like, you can remove the art and the artist, and it sort of still holds up. Like, even though they were kind of scumbags, like, not scumbags. Like, had unfortunate aspects to them as people.
Scumbags.
You're saying, like, actually Kafka was like, he was not known. I don't believe he was like a known, like, again, racist and
He's not
but you're saying, like,
he was a person.
The works and their impact and style upon the cultural artistic zeitgeist have well transcended who they were as people.
Like Star Trek, for instance, transcended Gene Roddenberry, that it now exists outside of any individual creator, just like Star Wars and Marvel. Like Stan Lee left his impression, but there are so many other. There's no individual represents the ideal of what like the MCU or Marvel is. So that's another style of it, where you have an emergent universe from, like, actually Harry Potter's a fascinating example, with J.K. Rowling being an awful person, but I don't know if yet Harry Potter exists outside of J.K. Rowling.
Well, it's all the movies exist outside of her.
Yeah, but she had her impression on it. I think that I don't think that Harry Potter has yet become.
In this case, they're still more closely intertwined versus Kafka versus Lovecraft's kind of.
Well, no, I actually think it's more comparable to Stan Lee and Marvel, or nowadays George Lucas and Star Wars. Yeah, George Lucas is intertwined with it, but it's long ago left George Lucas behind.
His hands, yeah. Sure.
Where J.K. Rowling, I think it's still the property's still tied to her, just like Lucas was in the prequel era.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris. Before you go on, I'll let you go next. But what I wanted to get to was, like, in my mind, it's kind of a scale in which, like, sometimes they're more closely interlinked. Like, perhaps the fact that you mentioned Ian Fleming has been long dead, so his property, his creation lives on beyond him, and so many other artistic hands have touched it. Same thing with the MCU to an extent, and Stan Lee. And again, I think there's a scale. Like, Ian, you enjoy in a sense, like, categorizing subsets of things, right? So I think
it's human nature.
To a degree, you can do that with this very topic. So go ahead, Chris. What do you think?
I'm gonna just mention this one last thing, and then I'm gonna move off of Star Trek.
Not be fucking Star Trek.
No, but about the J.K. Rowling thing, and about she's definitely a Trekkie, but she talks about it with sci-fi fantasy. Her name is Jessie.
0 points.
Jessie Gender. She does discuss a lot of with what J.K. Rowling, that controversy. I recommend her essays, because she does talk about not just LGBTQIA issues, but mental health issues as presented in different mediums. But I mean, that kind of speaks to, like, Ian, the point I never, was, something that's lived beyond the creator, like Discovery retconned, the misogyny that even Gene Roddenberry was responsible for. I'm just plugging this one person that I discovered this week, because she does a really great analysis of, like, mental health and certain social issues as represented in science fiction and fantasy. And it's not too far removed from what we're talking about.
Sure. I got another one for you. Like, we've covered for sure on the podcast, I believe 2 or 3 at this point, Highland stories. Highland was kind of like a fascist. Like he believed fascism was like a good political system, a good societal system, and that was imbued in a lot of his writing.
Mhm.
Now, I would say a lot of his stories, of course, have grown well beyond him, but it's still there. Like you can't escape the fact that it's written as such, even if it's like sort of now been interpreted and been taken from a different angle.
I almost disagree with that in the sense that
Let's talk about
because here's the thing is, yes, I gave examples of things that surpass the author, where the author has been killed that allow the story to live. However, there is like you can't just
scale.
Works defined by an author and his personality. Whether you're dealing with like biographies and people telling their stories, slice of life, where they are. But the thing is, like for instance, I think Hemingway is more important than any individual work he created. As much as I've read a lot of and enjoyed a lot of his works, it's his body of work as a representation of himself.
The artist is greater than the art. In this.
And I would say that Heinlein is like that because when you look at works that have lived on past him, they're satires of his work.
That is very true.
They're satires of the beliefs of the man who wrote.
They're mocking his actual beliefs that are imbued in his works. That's a good point. Like perhaps, but maybe it's a very good example of, again, like I said, on the other end, if there's like a chart or a scale, like on the y-axis, right? It's further down one end versus the other stuff, right? So I got something for you, Steve-O, because you mentioned it, and then I was going to follow up, but so I'll do it now. The MCU stuff, specifically Bryan Singer. Now he created he directed a few of the movies, a handful, not even like he did the X-Men, I believe, right? Not even like before like the MCU was like a thing. And then he was accused of some unfortunate practices in real life. So therefore, like, how to judge that? It's not like he was the be-all end-all helmsman of all this shit. But
let's not shy away from it if we're going to talk about it. He was accused of being a pedophile.
Yeah.
So
indeed, right? So then where does that lie? Like how? I guess of course it's all going to be subjective, but how much weight should we give that versus the actual the movies that you might just enjoy?
Steve, to be fair, he enjoyed his twinks. Kevin Spacey did that.
Yeah,
Kevin Spacey, same thing. Yeah.
As we darkly made it, he was doing a Spacey really.
And ironically, Bryan Singer directed The Usual Suspects.
Mm-hmm. Did he really?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
I think he
that was actually his first film.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah.
All right, of course I believe you, but I darkly laugh at that. But good fact.
Actually, though, I think that the Bryan Singer Kevin Spacey thing is fascinating because of the two roles they play in creating art. If you can watch The Usual Suspects not knowing who directed it and not knowing the backstory of it,
and appreciate it as
but you because in a sense the director and the creator are behind the scenes there, where Kevin Spacey you're reminded every time you see him as the as an actor of the crimes, and you have to make a judgment call, having like, do I want to sit and watch this individual perform for me? And actually, that's one of the interesting things about the Bart thing is that art is performative. Art is about the effect it has upon the audience. Where the author itself is kind of hidden, the actor is legitimately on stage.
The literal face of the art, if you will.
Yeah.
That's
So
a good distinction. Good, Chris.
Yeah.
To that point, Wagner wrote.
I have on my notes. Sorry, Chris. Wagner was a Nazi.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, I'm going to come back to the artist and the performer aspect of this. Is one of the most, in all music, one of the most gorgeous, haunting themes is the love theme to Tristan and Isolde. This is such a tremendously gorgeous, beautiful piece. It was written by such a horribly ugly nationalist. I mean, all
a D-bag Nazi.
Yeah, he wrote most of his own librettos, and they were all very nationalistic. Like Germany was literally the center of the universe. He wrote a creation story about Germany. And years later, when Hitler came to power, there was two conductors, Karl Bond and Herbert von Karajan. And there's there was some speculation as to whether they really joined the Nazi party because of belief or because they were threatened. Their families were threatened if they were to
Protect
leave
themselves,
Germany.
essentially, you're saying.
How much support they gave to the party, how much did they know about inner support. And I believe Leonard Bernstein, I know Karl Baum was acquitted, for lack of a better word, of being a Nazi. And Leonard Bernstein was a friend of Herbert von Karajan. And Leonard Bernstein actually, was just like, enough of this Nazi bullshit. He's a friend of mine. And actually, and to be honest with you, von Karajan is one of my favorite conductors. He's dead. He's not collecting any royalties. And he was before I found this out. But here's a really good example of Wagner, who was, a proto-Nazi, and then somebody who, a famous German composer who did conducted definitive orchestrations of Wagner's material. So that's all I had to say. Nazis, music.
It's certainly a gray area, and right, like maybe it's possibly like you have to take it on a case by case basis, or again, like in very specific subsets, as we mentioned, where like these 3 or 4 artists and attached to their art can be lumped together and assessed and analyzed as such in a certain way, but then the scale moves along, or moves again case by case. Well, I don't know if that's like the best way to do it, but it's sort of the way I kind of personally think about it, like at least in a general sense. So you got something, Steve-O? What do you think?
Well, I'm just trying to get down some of the ways that we're thinking about this, right? We just talked about there's the visibility of the actor on the screen. So the more visible you are, the closer you're going to be tied to your art, right?
But if I could just tie it back to what Grisha said, there's a difference between enjoying Wagner's music and going to see him orchestrate, knowing he's a Nazi.
Well, true.
But that goes to the visibility of it as well, and the immediacy of your enjoying the performance.
Yeah, of course. But there's always the like, all right, if I download The Usual Suspects, can I still enjoy it without feeling bad about watching a Kevin Spacey, Bryan Singer movie? Like if I steal it, is that better?
That's a funny.
I mean, it's like Usual Suspects is a really good one because it's a movie I've loved forever, and like, after all this shit has come out, like watching it again is like, it's still a good movie to me, but it's like kind of tainted. There's something else that I have to think about now every time I watch it. There's also the issue of like the closeness of the subject matter to the actual beliefs of the author or artist themselves, right? Like there's Orson Scott Card is like a known.
I was waiting for you to bring that one up. I knew that's the one that you had sort of set it up earlier.
Yeah, and I read Ender's Game when I was in high school, and it was a hugely formative book for me. I loved it. It's really weird to see him be. So I mean, like after reading that book, it feels strange to find out that he is so exclusive of people in his like actual life, because the book is this like whole like all races, all genders are just as good as one another, like and we're all like uniting to beat the aliens or whatever. But like and then it goes, the series goes on from there to say like, oh, we actually performed genocide on these aliens, and now we have to spend the rest of the like 4 other books that are in this series trying to right the wrongs that humanity did. And like it's just so weird to see him be like this kind of himself.
It's a jarring juxtaposition, you're saying.
Yeah, like asshole. So in terms of that, I don't see him being like, from before I found out that he was a jerk off, I have a signed copy of Ender's Game that I got from him, and I traveled like 2 hours to go, so made my dad drive me 2 hours to go see him when we were in high school. And it's really strange, but like to me, I don't see that book being a representation of him as a person, like his views. There are definitely books where you do see that, like you guys mentioned Heinlein earlier, and
the one that happened to affect you when you were
like Orwell, stuff like that. So like it is like, I think that's one of the things that you have to consider is also like how close that actual work is to the views of the author. Not to say that by any means that's even close to the only thing to consider, but I think it's an important part of the equation, you know?
That's kind of good.
Part of the Bart, his paper. It's a 6-page paper. I recommend reading it, although it's dense like he usually writes.
It's fun. Fun.
He's discussing when a character in a story says a line. Is it that character saying the line? Is it that character in like a moment saying the line? Is it the author saying the line? Is it the author in the moment it was written saying the line? Does temporal nature matter? Can you write? Can you be a Nazi, write something, stop being a Nazi, but you wrote the thing while you were?
Right. And how does that? How are we supposed to take that?
Thing like I'm going to expand upon what Bart said, but Orwell, when he was writing Animal Farm as, in a sense, communist propaganda or anti-communist propaganda, is he saying that? Is he being a representation of the zeitgeist at that moment? Like, where is the actual voice? And when you are
and how much weight should be?
If a character in a story says something that offends you, or you find offense in an action by a character, is it the character you should be offended by, or is it the author you should be offended by, or is it the society that allow this art to be produced? It's fascinating. Like, really, where does the responsibility lie? And I think in our modern sense, it lies with the creator. But
we more heavily weighted.
But that's again a more modern interpretation of art.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a little different. It depends on how far you're removed you are. I actually had a point to this. I mean, context is everything. Okay, because at the time of Wagner, this is before the Nazi movement. Maybe Hitler, his populist campaign gained some inspiration from it. I'm not saying that anti-Semitism is a new thing. It's not. Mm-hmm. But it's also to address your question. I do not have an answer for this at all, Ian. But it's context. I mean, I think we're really kind of circling around is like it's contextual. I don't think there's one definitive thing. Like Heinlein. Heinlein. Apparently, one of his last books, I haven't read it, "Stranger in a Strange Land," became a hippie anthem. Like
I've read it.
I actually have read "Stranger in a Strange Land."
Yeah, because I saw this documentary on Heinlein, and hippies were coming up to him and meeting him and taking their pictures with them. I believe
furious
before around the time of the Vietnam War.
Right.
This is, like I said, this is a documentary I saw about 10 years ago. So I'm just saying that, part of it was that he was kind of a multifaceted man, that maybe his ideas of fascism or whatever were kind of misrepresented because of he didn't
convey them. What do you mean? Like,
it didn't convey them as well.
They were misinterpreted,
or maybe he changed his opinions. I don't know.
Well, and also the thing is, even let's say we're dealing with there is no justification for his belief viewpoints, and he wrote things completely hypothetically.
Let's assume
assume that the scenario exists. Just because you create a piece of art doesn't mean it resonates with, as all of us are aware. What is it? The responsibility of the artist, or the responsibility of the society that accepts that work into to be considered art, as opposed to the ramblings of a crazy man?
Well, I mean, I guess the answer I can give you is what Chris has said. Like, there isn't an answer. There's no definitive thing you can say to that.
That's why I'm asking questions and not giving statements.
But that's like sort of like the entire point of this is because like it's going to be, like you said, Chris, and certainly to be fair, again, as I mentioned when Ian and I were sort of just bullshitting pre-discussing it, context is going to hugely matter in every single case. That's going to be true of almost anything, especially of a piece of art in society, whether it's ancient, post, Enlightenment era, modern, postmodern. I guess it's the shifting values of society, like that might, give it weight, give either the art itself more weight or the artist or whatever, like, division of percentage, I guess you want to say, that is allotted to each, and how impactful and influential or not it's going to be.
And just one last point about the Bart thing. We as critics are guilty of this, that we want the author to have an effect, because there are all those lofty questions that none of you have answers to. But if we say that, well, if we can decipher the author's intent, we
Then
can
case
we
closed.
justify our existence as critics, but we also can say that there is an
Now
easy
the
answer.
is this. Yeah, you're
All
right.
we need to do is enough research to answer the question, when it might be more complex. It might be a reflection of society and a deep level, where many different groups came together to look at a work and elevate it for different reasons with different interpretations of that work.
Yeah, but you're saying like through bars, like if you parse it down, it's like, all right, if we critically, in quotes, his own quotes, if you can't see me, critically look at it in the right way, then we can arrive at the definitive answer. Then bam, case closed. This is the be all end all interpretation.
I'm a worthwhile human.
You guys realize we've had this conversation before? I was trying to remember what was so familiar about it, and we did this almost
Getting deja vu.
very close thing when we did Susan Sontag, one of our first
And also when we did S/Z.
NS/Z. Yeah, I think they were around the same time actually. But
I go. Yeah, sorry, Chris. I think you want to.
Hey, listen, I wasn't on those, so
well, nobody stopped you, buddy.
No, but it's really funny because in a very meta way, the fact that we reviewed Gone with the Wind or D.W. Griffith, the fact that they're on the AFI, was one of those things where, I remember what I said at the end of Gone with the Wind. I'm like, should it be on the AFI? No. Do I recommend it? No. Should it be canceled? No. But the thing is, like, even us as critics, or
We're part of the problem.
self-important to analyze analysis. The thing is, it's one of those things like, are we enabling this? Are we perpetuating it? I mean, Rich has flat out told me that he wants to see Breath of a Nation. I'm like, if you ever want to see it, I'll sit through it with you, man. I mean, that is like taboo. I mean, we did a DW Griffith and we tore that fucking 3.5 hour piece of garbage apart. But the thing is, it's just like, in our analysis of it, in our attempt to, in our analysis of it, are we enabling it? Are we perpetuating the
just
whatever negativity is within it?
Just by having this conversation, just by having this episode, we're amplifying like these people, right? We're naming them and giving them like a platform inside of our own conversation and in our own heads.
Right, Steve. By
some
the
degree.
very nature of this, like, again, quote unquote, art form, a la criticism itself, like, you can't help it because it perpetuates it to a degree. And like, maybe it's just like an ingrained human instinct. Like, a caveman does a drawing on a wall, and other cave people are like, like it, good, no good, like whatever. Like, it's just part of human evolution.
I liked your early work better.
I like the other buffalo better than this or whatever, right? Sure.
I liked your mud before you went to the turd.
I like Stickman in pool better than Buffalo eating grass or whatever, right?
But
Like,
the turd blood really added a new dimension to your cave drawing.
But actually, that's a fascinating
drawn out bit.
discussion there, where why do we need to come up with the reasons that art failed, especially if we liked art earlier on? We need to justify
it has some value, but this is, well, people didn't like it because of this, or it was or
even
misunderstood.
you're trying to contextualize reflections of art as a definitive, and that's, I don't know. It's the thing is, just to answer your question earlier, though, I can separate the artist from the art from the artist, and although you can never do it fully, it's just that I try to go in with an open mind.
with that in the back of your mind, like having that instinct in a sense, sure. So I was gonna have one I meant to mention earlier, but I guess not levity per se, but I'm tied in the video games obviously because that's the art that I usually end up criticizing or at least analyzing the most. And so I've just played Watch Dogs Legion. I think I mentioned that the other week, and I'm about to play AC Valhalla. Both of them are Ubisoft games. Now, a la sort of a Bryan Singer / Kevin Spacey situation. I don't mean to laugh because it's serious stuff. Higher ups, the CEOs and the higher executives at Ubisoft have had very serious allegations, which are substantially backed up, that they basically have an abusive culture, right, and harassment culture, and they've been abused some very ugly stuff. Now, and because I'm me, I can't escape that. And like, and I guess I'm using them as an example only because, ironically to me, Chris, at the beginning of every goddamn Ubisoft game for the past decade, it's like, this game is being created by diverse people, blah, 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 blah. I certainly believe that the programmers and the artists and the coders and so forth, like,
Totally forgot about
they're
that.
the ones being ostensibly abused by and exploited by the higher ups. So like now I'm in this weird spot where
But
like,
it's equal exploitation.
maybe to an extent, but like I'm just saying it's a weird spot where like I enjoy the games, but they're apparently the company is run by scumbags. So like it's to your point, like now I can never unknow that, but I'm still going to like try to enjoy the art, even though knowing to some degree that like I'm funding assholes, or at least. And to be fair, they have ousted a bunch of people like at the top, so like they're trying to root out the bad actors, like those who are predatory and like doing bad things, and get them out of the company. That's nice, but the fact that it only came to light, and who knows, not exactly sure how long it's been going on, but I'm saying like the medium that I enjoy the most, and a couple of games that happen to be made by a company that now has come to light, that the art and the artists have a bigger division than they used to, and now I have to take that in consideration. Is all. But you're right. Like to your point, sorry, I'll let you go in a second, but sort of circle back to something you mentioned, or like you're right. It's all questions because it's all subjective, Chris. It's all context. A large majority of it is going to be, and it's going to inform like how you react to a piece of art and to what degree you can or will divorce that piece of art from the creators of it. So.
Well, I mean, two things. Number one, I didn't find out about this thing with Herbert von Karajan until I had already bought some of his records. But I wasn't trolling you guys, and I wasn't trying to do anything. But the reason I did bring up Star Trek at the beginning is because Roddenberry is canonized in so many ways. And they look at his ideals, but not the man and his fault. And there are a few of us who will do that and acknowledge that. And I thought, it's like, look, he's definitely far removed way than like horrible people. I mean, he wasn't a pedophile. He was not a Nazi. He was just an average human who had an ideal but didn't live by those ideals.
That we know of.
I'm not going there, but
history has let us.
But Scott, but to your point, that's the reason I did it is the same reason you mentioned Ubisoft, because it's kind of like, look, you have to just be aware that like, hey, maybe this person or this company did not live by the ideals that they project. But
you're right. I mean, like,
but of course, Star Trek's more out of Roddenberry's hands now than the Ubisoft's games are.
But the general idea remains, and like, I totally get it, and I agree, Chris. And I guess if nothing else, if you're listening to this, like, perhaps if you haven't thought about it, or at least, or like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this piece of art, like, without researching the creators and what perhaps their mindset / behaviors, etc., were, maybe it's something you should start considering more and see how that affects you, like affects your enjoyment or not, again, on a scale of a given piece of art in whatever medium it may be, versus knowing like a bit more history and the background of, again, the creators and the producers of it.
Or if you listen to Bart, you pay attention even less. That you just kind of look at art as what it says and not necessarily what the intention behind it was.
I mean, it's up to you, for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm saying I think it's an important consideration, like especially in our sort of postmodern era of, again, criticizing, analyzing, etc., discussing art, even if it's just pop culture. Like that's still part of the cultural climate, and I think it's something like that should be at least part of it, part of the cocktail, if you will, to some degree, and not completely ignored. It's just, again, it's going to be, I would purport that a sliding scale, sort of a grayer-ish map chart area, but you can't not consider it altogether, I guess, is what I want to say there. So yeah, perhaps that might, there's certainly a lot we can delve into, but I think we covered a lot of good ground. Maybe we'll come back and maybe do some more specific stuff later down the line with this, but
I actually think you should all read Death of the Author.
we will link that for sure. It is a very good article.
We could go back and discuss it more because it was it's 6 pages, and also Steve, you mentioned something about Sontag.
Mhm.
We did a lot of narrative theory initially on this podcast, and it's as I progressed in actually being in our professional critique, however you want to define that, and also just my knowledge in life, I've come to think that again, as I've grown as a person, I've come to, especially Bart, assess him differently than the initial time we did as Z. So I would like to, in a sense, maybe return to Bart, not reading SC again, but seeing a different work of his, so we can with older eyes.
With veteran eyes, if you will, to a degree. Yeah,
Because I've certainly quoted the braiding of thematics in our reviews.
Yep, it is something that's come up a number of times. Yeah, so like I guess in theory that will do it, at least for now, for this one topic part of it. You guys, Chris, Theo, anything you wanted to add or I missed or that you didn't get to?
Nope.
Good, Chris.
We could talk about this for another
Right,
week, and we
it's
still
either-
wouldn't come up
It's
with
either going to be cut off now or it's going to be a 3-hour fucking episode. So
What's funny is Scott and I had like a hour to 2-hour discussion on this prior. That is even better.
there was certainly that'll be the outtakes. But no, like seriously, there is certainly a lot more to delve into. And yeah, we sort of we scratched the surface a bit, but I think there's so much surface there, if you will, to run with this metaphor analogy, that you can get a lot out of it, and it's something to consider.
Since this is sort of the new season of philosophy, perhaps this will be the theme for philosophy going forward for this series.
We shall use this as a springboard officially here now on air going forward, and discuss it more because, like I said, we all agree there's certainly more to delve into. There's certainly more angles we can take and ways to discuss this. But perhaps as a starting, an opening salvo, if you will, as we used to like to say, perhaps this will serve as that
exploratory.
Yeah, exactly. So I think though for now for this episode we shall call it there. I've been Scott Thurlow. Like I said, neither me nor my art is of any value. I've been here with Chris Morgan.
Live long and prosper.
Stephen Amosi.
Aloha.
And Dr. Professor Jonathan Ian Manson.
And I can wear my Cosby sweaters without having any.
Now see,
I
had to
need
fucking
to
say
acknowledge.
Cosby
You had to
sweater
bring up
at
Cosby.
the very end of this episode. Thanks
Well,
you.
having to acknowledge him as a person.
For that sweater on purpose.
Well, to be,
Wait, am I in trouble for laughing at that?
you are in trouble.
Yep.
Cancel me.
We'll get back to it next time. For now, thank you so much for joining us. We've been the Lost Signals. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Lost Signals discusses philosophy, narrative, and the mechanics of criticism. Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.